Maybe we should just call it off today. What are you talking about? We've come this far, so don't hesitate anymore. Today, John was reluctant to go through with the checkup. As I tried to convince him, I couldn't help but wonder if it was normal to feel nervous facing a doctor for the first time. While we were discussing this, John's name was called, and I helped him as we headed to the examination room. Lynn, wait outside for me. But I always cause you trouble. Just take a break while I'm getting examined. With that, I was sent out of the examination room. Waiting in the lobby, it wasn't long before a nurse came out and brought John back. Mrs. Reddy, please come this way, she said, leading me into another room. Is something wrong? I asked the doctor nervously after being called into the separate room. Go to the police immediately. What? The situation is dire. I was shocked by what he said. And with that, I sprang into action. My name is Lynn Reddy. I'm a 28-year-old and I am a housewife. I have a husband, John, and an 8-year-old daughter, Emily. However, Emily and I are not related by blood. This is my first marriage, but John has been married before, and Emily is his child from that relationship. Are you sure about this? It's already a lot with a kid, and John said, trailing off. I just smiled back, telling him not to worry about it. John is blind. He used to be able to see, but he lost his sight in an accident while protecting his ex-wife. I met him through work. I write comics online, and one day, I got a request asking if I could illustrate this story. It turned out to be a novel written by John. I wanted everyone to know that even if you can't see, there are still things you can do. Besides, if I don't work, I can't support Emily. The story was filled with his experiences after becoming blind. Moved by his story, I was thrilled to adapt it into a comic. Then, the editor contacted me. The author of the novel would really like to meet you. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop. John showed up with the help of Emily's hand. He smiled gently, and I was quickly drawn to his calm demeanor. I want to be of help to you. I want to be your eyes. I've been wanting to be with you too. Your voice is so comforting and I love it, he said, confessing his love for my voice, and we started dating. Emily, would it be okay if I became your mom? Yes, she allowed, giving her blessing for us to get married. My parents were concerned about John being blind and having a stepchild. But if you've decided, we'll support you. That's right. But remember, you can always come back home, they added, ultimately offering their support. Knowing they would always be there to help, I felt secure going into married life. Emily, dinner's ready. Thank you, she replied. We've been living together since we started dating, but she hasn't opened up to me. Well, that's understandable. It's not easy to suddenly accept a woman who was once a stranger as her mother. All it takes is time, and slowly, she'll come to accept me. That smells good. Emily was about to say something when John, walking along the wall, came out. She seemed surprised by his appearance and flinched. John, are you okay? The table is over here, I said, concerned about Emily but first making sure John was all right. I'll be off then. In the meantime, Emily had gone to elementary school. By the time I turned around, she was already gone, and all I could hear was the sound of the front door closing. Hearing that, I sighed. Something wrong? Sorry. I was just thinking about how hard it is to close the distance with Emily. John looked a bit troubled by my words. So I hurriedly explained. I understood it wouldn't be easy right away and believed that time would help resolve it. Thanks for caring. Maybe Emily is still wary of the idea of a mother. Yvonne Kirk, his ex-wife and Emily's real mother, left them as soon as she found out John was blind. Abandoned by her biological mother. It's possible Emily is wary of me trying to become her new mother. That was John's guess. I'm sorry, but I hope you can be patient with her. Yes, of course, I replied, smiling even though he couldn't see. John, smiling back, thanked me. Shall we have breakfast? Let's eat well and get on with our work. Sounds good. Both of us work from home, but in different rooms. We work at our own pace. Lynn, are you gonna stay in your room all day today? Yes, that's the plan. I'll probably only come out for meals. Got it. Just don't overdo it. At his words, I nodded with a smile and headed to my office. I wonder what kind of work John does. We make it a point not to interfere with each other's work. So, I don't really know what John does during his work hours. He used to write books in Braille, but I haven't heard anything of that sort recently. Well, my earnings alone are enough for us to live comfortably, so it's not a problem. I'm sure he has his struggles that I can't even imagine. Just being there to support him is enough for me. With that thought, I decided to focus on my own work. A few days later, John and I were on our way to a hospital a few hours' drive away. Lynn, I know you're busy, sorry about this. Don't worry about it. I want to help. Honestly, I think it would be better to go to a big hospital closer to home instead of coming all the way here. But John seems to have his reasons for insisting on this hospital. A childhood friend of mine works here as a doctor, someone who knows my situation well. He reconnected with this childhood friend after being brought to this hospital following the accident. Since then, she has been a great help, especially after Yvonne left us, giving us advice on various matters. That's why I've decided, if I'm getting checked, it'll be by her. Oh, she's a woman? Yes. I had assumed his childhood friend was a man. Knowing she's a woman made me feel slightly uneasy. Even if it's just for a medical examination, and they are strictly doctor and patient, the idea of going out of our way to see a female childhood friend bothers me a bit. What kind of person is this childhood friend? She's very kind. She and her husband are also close. Knowing she's married puts me at ease. A married woman wouldn't do anything inappropriate. Then, John and I entered the hospital together. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Reddy. I'm Anna Nishimiya, John's attending physician. Anna introduced herself with a gentle smile. She was very beautiful and looks very kind. It must be tough for you too, adjusting to a new lifestyle can be exhausting. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. She offered. I felt ashamed for almost being jealous of her. What a reliable and kind person she is. Feeling that way, I happily exchanged contact information with her when she suggested it. But that might have been a mistake. Oh, a message from Anna. That night, a message from her appeared on my phone. Are you really doing okay with John? Since John has it tough, you need to be strong. What? What's this? I was puzzled by the content of the message. It didn't seem like something she would send as a doctor. I instinctively discussed it with John. She's always been kind of overprotective, trying to be like an older sister to me. Maybe that's why she sent such a message. According to him, she has always acted like John is someone I need to protect since they were kids. Especially after we got remarried, she was very worried, possibly because of Yvonne's departure. So, maybe she's acting a bit cold towards you because she sees you as my old friend. He suggested. Hopefully, once she sees we're happy, she'll feel relieved. Right. Then, I need to make sure we are happy. I said with a laugh, and John joined in with his laughter. Emily was watching us with a look as if she wanted to say something. Emily, is something wrong? It's nothing. When I asked her, she glanced at John. I'm going to bed early, she said and went to her room. Emily should try to smile a bit more. Then, I heard John's murmur. Turning to him, John cocked his head and said, What? I felt a bit of discomfort at his reaction. Can you tell Emily's expressions? Yeah, we are family, after all. I can tell by the tone of her voice, John said with a smile. Indeed, being together for 8 years, it's possible to understand each other through the tone of voice. But why could he respond to me turning around without making a sound? Just a coincidence? Something wrong, Lynn? No, it's nothing, I replied, wondering if he sensed my confusion or found my silence odd, asking with concern. I shook my head at him. I was just overthinking. I convinced myself. Lynn? On a rare day off, Emily surprisingly initiated a conversation. Taken aback, I managed to smile without letting her notice my surprise. What's up? This, when Dad isn't around, she said, handing me a piece of paper. As I took the paper, she hurriedly said, "Please make sure Dad doesn't see this." Then she left in a rush. I heard the front door close, so she must have gone out. She mentioned going to a friend's house, I think. What's this? The paper had a certain number written on it. Lynn? Has Emily already left? John's voice came as I pondered the meaning of the number. I quickly hid the paper in my pocket. Yes, she's already gone. It feels a bit hectic. Isn't that more childlike? It'd be nice if she could act that way in front of me someday. John chuckled wryly at my words, seemingly unaware of what I had hidden. What's up, John? You're off today, aren't you? Usually, John sleeps in until nearly noon on his days off. So I hadn't expected him to be up at what was still morning by any standard. I was thinking, if it's not too much trouble, maybe we could go for a walk together? John suggested with a gentle smile. That sounds nice. I could use a change of scenery. Lynn, you're such a hard worker. Just don't overdo it, he said, probably thinking my exhaustion was due to my busy work schedule. However, my weariness wasn't from work. It was the messages from Anna that were draining me. Since her initial contact, she's been sending messages telling me not to be a burden on John. At first, I replied, "It's okay. We're supporting each other." But as the messages kept coming almost daily, I've started to ignore them. It's been a while since we've gone for a walk. Yes. I memorized the number Emily had given me and disposed of the paper during our walk, hoping I wouldn't have to use it. A few days later, it was time for John's regular checkup, and I took him to that hospital again, several hours away. What? Anna's off? Yes. Apparently, she's caught that contagious disease that's going around. The difference this time was that Anna was off. However, there are other competent doctors available, so we decided to have one of them see John. It was good that coming here for hours wasn't a waste. I thought so, but John seemed to have a different idea. If she's not here, maybe we should just call it off today. What? I turned to him in surprise. What are you talking about? It's a regular checkup, we have to go through with it. Besides, we came all this way, let's make the most of it, I argued. John made a face of reluctance. I calmed him down and got him to sit in the waiting room chair. Are you sure we shouldn't just cancel for today? Stop it. We've come all this way, let's not give up now. John was particularly resistant to the checkup today. As I tried to persuade him, I wondered if it's normal to feel nervous about seeing a new doctor. While we were discussing this, John's name was called, and I assisted him towards the examination room. Lynn, wait outside for me. But I always cause you trouble. Just take a break while I'm getting examined. With that, I was sent out of the examination room. Waiting in the lobby, it wasn't long before a nurse came out and brought John back. Mrs. Reddy? Please, come this way, she said, leading me into another room. Is something wrong? I asked the doctor nervously after being called into the separate room. Go to the police immediately. What? If you don't, you'll end up being used and then discarded. The words that came from his mouth left me in shock. And so, I immediately took action. A while later, I received a call from John on my phone. Lynn? Where on earth did you go? Me? I'm at the police station right now, with Emily and Anna. John was silent for a moment, clearly taken aback by my words. And then muttered in a faint voice. "Why? Mike told me the truth about you." At that time, it was a doctor named Mike who revealed the truth to me. Dr. Mike called me and said, "John can actually see." "What?" "And he's not the kind man you think he is," he informed me. His words left me honestly confused. It's understandable that you find it hard to believe, but haven't you ever felt something was off? And that's when I thought back on John's recent behavior. His immediate reactions to my actions despite supposedly not being able to see. Moving around the house without assistance, getting dressed perfectly, among other things. But what bothered me the most was his relationship with Emily. Emily always seemed wary of John's gaze, and John would immediately speak up if he heard her talking to me. It was as if he was monitoring Emily's every move. Indeed, there have been things that concern me. He's showing you a facade. Anna and he have been deceiving you together. Indeed, if John's blindness was a lie, it would be strange for Anna not to notice. Being childhood friends, she might have been complicit with him. Anna and John are having an affair. What? Apparently, Anna's cooperation with John wasn't because they were acquaintances but because they were involved in an affair. Learning more about the situation, I found out that the relationship between Anna and John started around the time of Yvonne, who was aware of it. Being a nurse, Yvonne was closer to Dr. Mike and others, consulting with them about her concerns. Just as I confronted them, I heard about the accident involving Yvonne and John. I recounted, a bad feeling growing inside me. I didn't want to believe it, but I believe John played a part in causing that accident. Dr. Mike told me, his words hitting me with shock. Afterward, she apparently went back to her hometown, and we lost contact with her. I've heard that Emily was taken in by John. Yes, she's actually living with me now. John probably took in Emily for child support and to gauge how much truth she knows. That's probably why he was checking on us whenever we talked, making sure not to say anything unnecessary. Realizing this, Emily wouldn't open up to me and seemed to be running away from John. I can hardly believe it, but some things do make sense. I wish we could contact his ex-wife, but she seems to have changed her contact details. That's when I remembered the phone number Emily gave me. Actually, Emily gave me a certain phone number. I revealed, deciding to call it to discover the truth. The call was answered by Yvonne, just as I expected. I told John, he fell silent. Ignoring John's silence, I continued my story. She was being monitored by your parents, but still wanted to maintain a connection with her daughter, hence she gave Emily a contact number for a phone you guys didn't know about. Emily didn't have her own smartphone and she couldn't use the landline without John watching. The only person she could reach out to was me. So she passed me the number. Being a nurse, she's observant. She found a time when your parents' surveillance was lax and escaped. What? What are you doing? John's voice, irritated in a way I'd never heard before. He revealed his true self. And that's why I contacted Emily's school, and now, we're all at the police station. In front of me, a mother and child are having an emotional reunion. Seeing the two of them like this almost brings me to tears too. Sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. What's sticking my nose? I did what any decent person would do. Yvonne and Emily both thanked me through their tears. What I felt seeing that was intense anger. Anger at the selfish actions that tore a family apart, at the deceit for personal gain. And the novel that moved me was built on lies. Learning this truth, I was so furious. She has proof that she was confined by your parents, and with Dr. Mike's medical report, we can prove the disability benefits you received under the pretense of being blind were fraudulent. Why would you do this? You enjoyed our life together, didn't you? Indeed, I had felt happy with him. I married him because I loved him more than anything. So, you were just laughing at me, right? John fell silent again after I said this. Actually, before going to the police station, I had stopped by our house and peeked into his office. I thought I might find evidence of his affair. What I found was, there were messages between you and Anna, mocking me. It was messages which I was called oblivious and easy to manipulate. Anna had asked him, "Why did you choose such a woman?" He had replied, "For the money. She's simple, moved by my novels." He chose me because I had an income as a webcomic artist and because I was simple enough to be moved by his stories. I was thoroughly underestimated. To that, John had the audacity to say, "It couldn't be helped." What could possibly not be helped? As I pondered this, he started to explain unasked. "I never wanted to do this. But I desperately needed the money, and the only person I truly love is you, Lynn. Do you really think I can believe those words? After you planned to get rid of me?"
What? You saw that too?
Yes, in addition to the messages with Anna, he had been planning to dispose of me. John lived a life of luxury without working. Couldn't forget such a lifestyle and had set his sights on me as a new source of income. Being a webcomic artist with a good income and working from home made it easy for John to keep an eye on me. "So, you were planning to make it look like an accident once you were done with me?" "That was just a joke, I wasn't serious." "It didn't seem like a joke to me. That's why we all rushed to the police," I said, to protect myself from potential threats to my life and to expose their fraud. Emily was there to be protected from John, and Yvonne was there to file a report for defamation and the confinement and lies spread about her. "You're finished now. The police are on their way to you," I informed him. He cursed under his breath, seemingly panicked. Shortly after, I heard Dr. Mike's voice. "Running away is futile. John had attempted to flee and failed. It looks like it's over." I hung up the phone, hearing the police's voices on the other end. The police were likely heading to Anna's place, who was recovering at home, and John's parents' home as well. "It's all going to be okay now," I reassured Emily. "Thank you for letting me see my mom." She returned with a radiant smile. Her smile, which I had longed to see, filled me with joy. Afterward, Emily and her mother apparently went back to Yvonne's parents' home. A place far enough to require a plane ride, making it hard for John and his schemes to reach them. "Leave that man to me. I'll make sure he faces the consequences," I promised them, hoping to offer some peace of mind. With smiles on their faces, Emily and her mother returned to their hometown. As for John, he ended up in police custody due to this ordeal. Since the plan to harm me hadn't been carried out yet, it was considered insufficient evidence. However, the matters concerning the benefits and Yvonne were judged as malicious. As a result, John has been sentenced to prison time. Is that so? I'm glad to hear that. Today, I met with Dr. Mike to report about John. Upon hearing the report, he smiled in relief. "What about Dr. Anna?" "She's been charged for writing a false medical report." Dr. Mike explained Anna's current situation. It appears she's been stripped of her medical license and has been expelled from the hospital. Furthermore, it's been discovered she was involved with multiple patients and was taking hospital supplies home without permission, leading to various charges from the hospital. Additionally, her husband has divorced her after knowing everything. Well, it's karma for her actions. "Lynn, you got divorced as well, right?" "Yes, naturally. My divorce from John was successfully finalized. A lawyer facilitated the process, and I've blocked all contact with him. It allowed me to divorce him without having to see him. I'm truly glad we could at least save you," Dr. Mike said with a smile. He seemed to have regretted not being able to save Yvonne before. Upon seeing me with John, he was determined to help this time and had been working behind the scenes. There wasn't proof of Anna conspiring with John, so I was biding my time, waiting for an opportunity to expose the truth about his site. To see through John's lies, we first needed to examine him. However, Anna always insisted on being John's doctor and never let anyone else take her place. So, I was waiting for the right moment, and finally, a golden opportunity presented itself. No matter how good his acting is, he can't fool a doctor's eyes. Dr. Mike said with a smile, as if to say he had accomplished his mission. Thank you so much. If Dr. Mike hadn't told me the truth that day, I might not be here now. I said, expressing my heartfelt gratitude. It's me who should thank you for believing in me. Dr. Mike replied with a smile. After a while, I noticed that Anna had been trying to contact me. I forgot to block her. Dozens of calls and messages. The messages said, "You've ruined my life because of you." She tried to take someone else's life first. She has no right to complain, I said, and without replying, I blocked her number. Currently, I'm back at my parents' house. They probably don't know where my parents live, so I should be able to live in peace for a while. Lynn, we're about to have dinner. How's work going? Thanks, Mom. I've just reached a good stopping point. I replied with a smile and went to join my mother. Later, the news was all about a certain story. The author of that famous webcomic arrested for fraud. My webcomic had become popular, and there were plans to turn it into an anime soon. But it turned out that everything was false, so it was called off. As the creator of the webcomic, I faced some criticism. But since the editors and the hospital vouched for me, I'm now seen more as a victim of deception. When John gets out, he won't have a place to return to. He's been deceiving people all along. I hope he fully experiences the consequences of his actions. Some years later, I was back at my parents' house for a brief errand. Then the doorbell rang. Hello? It's been a while, Lynn. I've come to pick you up, said John, having given up his act of blindness. I was relieved. I checked the monitor before opening the door, and he began to explain his situation unasked. He was arrested over the incident with Yvonne, had to repay the disability benefits with debts, and his parents moved away due to the judgment from neighbors, leaving him no home to return to. You're all I have left, Lynn. Let's be happy together. I refuse, I said. His face was like being shocked. His attitude, as if he were the victim, was irritating. It's your fault this happened. Don't you think you should take responsibility? I don't. I bear no responsibility. It's all the result of your actions. Even then, John tried to cling on despite my rejection. As I was about to call the police. What are you doing here? Someone addressed him. John turned around in surprise. You, the doctor. There stood Dr. Mike, angry yet composed, along with my parents. Really, coming here to cling to her? How pathetic. Dr. Mike criticized. Shut up. It's all because you meddled. John retorted. I did what was right as a doctor and as a human being. Dr. Mike responded, maintaining his cool despite his anger. While they were arguing, I reported to the police. Your selfishness has caused trouble for many people. If anyone should take responsibility, it's you. Don't mess with me. Then, John tried to attack Dr. Mike. Enough already. But he was stopped by my father. He had learned boxing in the past and easily overpowered John, who hadn't exercised properly due to years of pretending to be blind. Damn it! Let go! John's protests were in vain as he was held firmly by my father until the police I had called took him away. Are you okay, Lynn? Yes, thank you. After John was gone, I answered his worried look with a smile. Then he relieved and smiled. He rushed over the moment he saw him. Indeed. I can trust him with her. My parents smiled warmly at our interaction. Actually, we are engaged. After everything with John, we found common ground and started dating following his proposal. Yes, please leave her to me, he said with a nod, and my parents responded. We'll leave her in your hands. Well, the moving is done, shall we celebrate at the new house? I had come to my parents' house today for their move. It was meant to be a precaution against John and his associates, though it seems we barely made it in time. But at least, I got to see his heroic side, and next time, John will find no one here, only his despair. Let's go. All right. He offered his hand. I took it with a smile. And now, some time later. It's my second wedding day.
Lynn, you look beautiful.
Thank you, Emily. Emily and her mother made it to the ceremony, blessing us abundantly. I couldn't become her mother. But seeing her happy smile was more than enough.
Have fun today. Yeah. And, congratulations on your marriage.
I responded to her smile with one from the bottom of my heart. My name is Catherine. I'm currently 34 years old, and I've been living with my mother at our family home since my father passed away 3 years ago. I chose to stay at home because I felt it was too risky to leave my mother alone. So, I've been living at home for these 3 years. During this time, the worst kind of people paid a visit to me and my mother. These awful individuals were none other than my real brother, Bob, and his wife, Jane. I've known my brother since he was born, and Jane, his wife, was a classmate of his since middle school. They've been dating since then, and Bob would bring Jane home every vacation, so I got to know her too. To put it bluntly, I can't forget these two. To be honest, they used to bully me just for fun. Both my parents were busy with their jobs, so it was pretty common for them to be absent on weekends. However, when they weren't home, that's when the worst time would start. Our family home, which we've been living in, is a rather spacious mansion built by my father, who was a CEO. But as soon as I was told to play hide and seek in this mansion and I got inside a closet, my brother and Jane immediately filled the closet with stuff, blocking my way out. I was often stuck in the closet until just before my parents returned home, and would frequently get scolded by my mother for messing up the inside of the closet. However, since my mother only worked in the mornings, she came home early one day and saw Bob and Jane stuffing me in the closet and blocking the door. She was furious as if she was on fire. From then on, I was never locked in the closet again, but the harassment from the two never ceased. I hated my parents for not being at home when I needed them. Of course, I resented my brother and Jane, but I also felt spiteful towards my parents who wouldn't help me. However, when I reached middle school, for some unknown reason, Bob and Jane shredded my school uniform with scissors, scribbled all over almost all my textbooks with pens, and cut them with scissors. They even ruined my cushions and beddings. I later learned that the two, who were high school students at the time, got bad grades on their final exams and were pissed off from being scolded by their parents. That's probably why they took such a horrible revenge on me. I was dumbfounded in my tattered room. Why am I experiencing such a thing? Why won't anyone help me? I stood there, lost in those thoughts. Then, when I didn't come to the dining room even at dinner time, my mother, who came to call me, saw my room and screamed. Upon hearing her, my father also rushed in. My brother, who came in last, was struggling to suppress his laughter, and occasional chuckles slipped out. To my surprised parents, I said, "Mom, Dad, I want to leave this house." As soon as I said that, tears started to overflow. No one is helping me. Bob and Jane are always mean to me together. My toys, my study tools, and my clothes are all ruined. I don't want to live in such a house. I hate both of you, Dad and Mom. You guys won't help me. Perhaps it was the first time I cried so much in front of my family. Until then, I had been silently enduring and crying quietly even when things were tough. But then, I cried out loud like a child. Seeing me like this, my mother hugged me and said, "I'm sorry for everything until now." Even my brother, after seeing such a scene, seemed to realize the gravity of the situation and tried to run away, but my father grabbed him by the collar. "Do you realize what you've done? This is a crime." Although my father didn't yell, his low voice was scary even to me, who wasn't being scolded. "Ah, crime, that's an exaggeration. We just played a bit too much. Destruction of property is a crime.
You understand that you need to compensate for it, right? But Catherine is family. And I'm a minor. Minors can't be criminals, right?
My father sighed deeply at my brother's frivolous words.
Indeed, a minor like you doesn't have the ability to pay. However, it's the parents who clean up the mess. If you can't compensate, we will have to. We also bear responsibility for raising you this way. I think it's time you go live with your uncle. Huh?
This uncle was actually my father's younger brother. He was a stern figure who absolutely despised dishonesty and was feared by all the neighborhood kids, kind of like a boogeyman. He was nice to well-behaved children like me and the other kids, but he had no tolerance for pranksters like my brother, Bob, and Jane. Bob never got along well with this uncle.
No way! I don't want to live with Uncle. I promise I won't do this kind of thing anymore. I've heard that too many times. When you and Jane locked Catherine in the closet. When you two chased Catherine around. When you threw bugs at Catherine, knowing she's afraid of them. Each time we learned of your actions, we scolded you and you always promised to never do it again. But you did it anyway. We can't keep someone who hurts our family at home, even if they are family. Never set foot in this house again.
With that said, my father took Bob by the scruff of his neck and dragged him away. Later, I found out that my father and mother had been angry at Bob's behavior. However, even after being scolded, Bob didn't seem to understand why he was being punished. He just continued his annoying antics against me. He must be beyond help. That's what I decided to think. There are idiots in the world who don't understand the most basic rules of society. I learned this from watching Bob and Jane. Originally, Bob planned to go to some university on our father's dime after finishing high school. However, our father told him, "Someone like you will just end up hurting others even in university," and so Bob ended up working at our uncle's company right after graduating from high school. However, it seemed like Bob desperately wanted to escape our uncle's place as soon as possible. As soon as he finished high school, he rented an apartment with Jane, who had also just finished high school, and they wanted to live together. They started their cohabitation life with the understanding that neither our parents nor uncle would help with rent or living expenses. And then, for some reason, Bob asked me to lend him some money. At the time, I had just entered high school and was not working part-time. All the money I had saved up, which used to be stolen by Bob when he lived at home, was fully reimbursed by my father and mother, as I had written it all down in a notebook. So, I did have the money that I had diligently saved up, but I had no intention of handing it over to him.
To Bob's request, I replied, "Aren't you ashamed to be asking your high school sister for money? I'm not even working, so I don't have any extra money. There's no way I'm giving you any."
After that, I told both my mother and father about Bob's attempt to borrow money from me, and they were angry and promised that they would not provide any further assistance. I thought that Bob and Jane should live on their own without relying on others. Since then, I have worked hard and went to college. I studied diligently in college as well, and after graduation, I joined a company where I continued to learn new things. I was so busy with my own life that I had completely forgotten about Bob. But just as I had forgotten about him, an invitation to his wedding arrived at our house. The bride was, of course, Jane, with whom he was living. Oh, so those two are finally getting married, I thought as my parents and I discussed whether we should attend the wedding of a family member. However, a few days before the wedding, my father collapsed and was taken away by an ambulance. He was always a fragile man, but this was the first time he had collapsed, so both my mother and I panicked and called an ambulance. At that time, I reached out to my brother, but he replied, "I'm about to get married. Don't call me during this crucial period of my bachelorhood." Even when I told him that our father had been urgently hospitalized, he brushed it off, saying, "He just tripped, didn't he? Make sure to come to my wedding." With that, he hung up. Not long after, our father passed away. Given the circumstances, a wake and funeral were inevitable, so my mother and I informed my brother that we wouldn't be able to attend his wedding. Despite his insistence that we come, my mother and I decided to remain absent. We also informed Jane's parents about our father's passing and our inability to attend the wedding. Although Jane's parents understood our predicament, my brother and Jane said, "You guys not coming to the wedding is so disrespectful." I suppose the term rudeness was coined for people like you. We put in a lot of effort for our wedding. Are you trying to ruin it? The words that were left on my mother and I's voicemail were so absurd that it made me want to ask who the real rude person was here. While my mother and I were busy conducting the funeral smoothly, my brother and Jane went ahead with their wedding without giving a second thought to our father's death. From then on, my mother and I never mentioned it, but we felt our relationship with my brother had been completely severed. But, out of the blue, my brother showed up at our doorstep. When I opened the front door in response to his "I've got a delivery" over the intercom, there stood my brother and Jane. I was caught off guard as the monitor only showed silhouettes. As soon as I opened the door, my brother and Jane, carrying large luggage, barged in, pushing me aside.
Hey, what's the rush?"
I protested. It seemed that my brother had completely forgotten the words of our father, who had once told him never to step into our house again. The two of them, who had brashly entered the house, put down the luggage they were carrying in the hallway and started talking nonsense at me.
"You and Mom should leave this house immediately." "What? Isn't Mom diagnosed with dementia? This luxurious mansion is not suited for someone like her and a loser like you who never improves. This kind of mansion should be taken over by glamorous people like Jane and me. So, you guys should leave right away."
"What?" I was stunned. What on earth was my brother talking about? After 3 years since our father's death, he hasn't apologized, visited the grave, or done anything at all, and now he's asking for the mansion. Furthermore, while presuming that our mother has dementia, he's planning to evict her? I was left speechless. Then, our mother emerged from a room in the back. "Catherine, what's going on?" As my mother peeked out and saw my brother, she said something unbelievable.
"Oh, who might you be? If you're a stranger, please leave," she said.
Hearing this, my brother and Jane laughed mockingly at her.
"See? This is how she is every time we call her. Her dementia must be getting worse. I'll leave it to you to take care of Mom. You can have Mom. I'll take the mansion. After all, I'm the eldest son, so it's only right that I get the mansion."
With that, my brother walked deeper into the house. Moreover, Jane, imitating Bob, turned to me and our mother and said, "Take the old lady and get out. I never want to see you again." I rushed to my mother's side and asked, "Mom, are you okay?" After that, as if we were being driven out, my mother and I left the mansion. Leaving all the old furniture behind, my mother and I took our belongings and fled the house. Fortunately, a friend of mine, who heard about our situation, offered us his house, saying he was abroad and couldn't take care of it. Originally, his cousin was taking care of the house, but since he's going to be transferred to another state next year, it seemed like perfect timing since there would be no one to look after the house. Upon arriving at the house and setting down our luggage, my mother and I finally felt at ease and took a deep breath. Then, my mother said with a laugh,
"We've left that house, and I still don't like the way Bob and Jane act. Maybe we should sell the house."
She said it outright. I asked my mother the question that had been on my mind.
"Bob said you have dementia, Mum. What's that about?" "Oh, that. About 2 years ago, I started getting frequent requests from those two to lend them money. But they didn't even come to their father's funeral, and they never contacted me afterwards. I just couldn't comprehend how they had the nerve to ask for money. So every time, I pretended not to know them and said, 'Who? I don't know you. You're a stranger to me, right? Oh, I see.'"
It seems that Bob and Jane misunderstood my mother's indifference and disregard for them, treating them as strangers because she didn't want to have anything to do with them anymore. They mistook this as her genuinely forgetting who they were. That's why they thought she had dementia. In any case, I think it's wrong to evict someone you think has dementia. My mother immediately decided to arrange for the sale of the mansion. We'd been talking about selling the overly large mansion since our father passed away, and we were living there just the two of us. At that time, one of the executives from my father's company, where I am now receiving training as a successor, asked me to sell him the mansion if we were planning to sell. So, the buyer is pretty much decided. All that's left is to go through the formalities. When I talked to a real estate acquaintance and explained the situation to the executive of the buyer, they agreed that if we left Bob and Jane alone, the house would be in serious trouble, and something needed to be done quickly. And then, a week later, my smartphone rang incessantly. My mother's phone was the same. There were many calls from Bob to my mother's phone, and from Jane to mine. They both probably wanted to tell us the same thing, but we found it amusing and decided to ignore them for 30 minutes, and we just enjoyed our tea. As we chatted, an hour passed without us noticing, and it seemed like Bob and Jane had been trying to reach us the whole time. When I finally answered the call, Jane exclaimed, "Finally. Why didn't you answer immediately? There's a big problem. The house has been taken over."
Wait. Didn't you two take over the house? I think we're the ones who should be saying that we've been taken over, I responded. No. Bob and I took over this mansion, but now strange people have come and are demanding that we leave. They just barged into the house and are trying to kick us out. Our mansion has been taken over, she exclaimed.
I couldn't help but burst out laughing. I really wanted to tell her that they were the ones who invaded the house in the first place and were unlawfully occupying it. Chuckling a bit, I replied, "You're talking about taking over, but you're not even the legal owner. My mother, who was the rightful owner, has sold the house to a new owner. So, strangers who have no connection at all should quickly move out."
What? She sold it? This mansion? But this mansion belongs to Bob, she responded in shock. When did anyone ever say that? I asked. Well, no one said it, but Bob is the eldest son. Isn't this house, this property, and his dad's company eventually going to belong to him? And I'll be living elegantly as the wife of the CEO in this mansion. Despite all of that, Jane was frantic.
I burst out laughing again. The fact that she thought that just because he was the eldest son, he would automatically receive the mansion and become the CEO of the company his father used to run was astonishing. Such naive thinking. Given Jane's staunch belief, Bob probably also believed that he would inherit both the mansion and the company, even though no one had ever promised him that. Again, I laughed at Jane's words.
Bob as a CEO? You as a CEO's wife? How can you even dream of such things? You're both still working as low-level employees at the company where you first got picked up, without ever studying to succeed the business.
She probably didn't expect to be ridiculed. Stunned by my words, Jane retorted, "What? In that case, I'll inherit the company from Uncle." I laughed even more.
You should at least check your company's personnel announcement. As for my uncle's company, his cousin's son became the president last month. What? So, there's no way for Bob to become CEO, and I can't be a CEO's wife? Jane was in disbelief. That's correct. Can I hang up now? I don't think I need to talk to strangers anymore, I replied. Wait. Please, Catherine, give us some money, Jane pleaded. Well, goodbye then.
I ended the call. I later heard from Uncle about what happened next. Bob and Jane didn't want to leave the mansion, they clung to the pillars and refused to go. Uncle had to come and pick them up. It seems that since they were hired by Uncle's company, they have been undergoing a strict education, and they were so scared that they cried as Uncle took them away. It was decided that they would be left at a mountain retreat of one of Uncle's acquaintances, because they were too unpredictable when left on their own. They've been warned by Uncle that if they don't straighten up at the retreat, they won't be able to leave the mountain for the rest of their lives. Despite this, they've tried to escape multiple times, but they've been caught each time. As for me, The person who said he would take care of the house management was my fiancé, who's currently working abroad. I'm currently living in his parents' house. He's planning to end his long-term assignment abroad this year, so we'll be planning our wedding ceremony soon. My mother and uncle, who helped us out, will be invited to the wedding. Of course, we will not invite Bob and Jane.
Now that the heir is born, you're of no use to me. Leave the kid and get out. We don't have the luxury to provide for a freeloader.
David's words left me feeling dizzy. All this time, I had been working hard for David. But all that awaited me were his harsh words, treating me like an object. Just because he's my husband doesn't mean he gets a free pass for everything. David crossed a line that should never be crossed as a human being and a husband. That is something I can never forgive. Slowly, I could feel my feelings for David cooling. What remained was nothing but resentment towards David. That's why I decided to make David's life a living hell. My name is Karen Connolly, a 38-year-old homemaker. I live with my husband David. David's family runs a well-known resort hotel. Currently, my father-in-law manages the business, but David is next in line. David is busy every day trying to become a competent manager. Of course, I fully understand how challenging it is to be a business owner. Thus, I had been striving every day to support David as his wife in the future. In the midst of this, I became pregnant with David's child. David has no siblings, and since this child is our first, if it's a boy, he would definitely be David's successor. When David heard the news of my pregnancy, he was overjoyed.
Finally, I'm going to have a child. You must give birth to a boy. I couldn't sleep well out of worry because we didn't have an heir. His words seemed to suggest that a child of any other gender wouldn't be valuable. It took us a while to have a child, and before we knew it, I was already 38. Whether or not we could have another child was uncertain. Maybe he said it unconsciously, but David's words weighed heavily on my heart. I must give birth to a boy. But what if it's a girl? Overwhelmed by such fears, I attended regular health checkups. David never once accompanied me to these checkups. Of course, he's busy with work and often out of the house, but even on his days off, David would just relax at home and never offered to drive me to the hospital. Alone, battling my fears, I went to a regular checkup that day. Then, it was confirmed that I was pregnant with a boy. In that moment, I felt as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had successfully become pregnant with a boy. From then on, I did my best to ensure a healthy birth. I thoroughly researched prenatal nutrition, and even when morning sickness took away my appetite, I forced myself to eat nutrient-rich meals for the sake of having a healthy baby boy. Absolutely, give birth to a healthy boy, because he's going to be my successor. If a child with any problems is born, our hotel won't be able to continue running. You have a big responsibility. Every now and then, David would put this pressure on me. Each time he said such things, it felt like a heavy burden was being placed on my shoulders. The thought of our child not being born healthy terrified me. But at the same time, I felt guilty towards the baby in my womb. As a mother, no matter what kind of child is born, I should love them. Yet somewhere inside me, I harbored feelings like, "You must be born with a healthy body." Towards my unborn child, I felt as if I was projecting my own burdens. Whether it was due to mental stress or not, my health continued to decline. My morning sickness was so severe, I often found myself throwing up shortly after eating. According to my in-laws' belief that families should dine together, David always made sure to be home for dinner after finishing his work. The usual routine was him eating the dinner I prepared, then relaxing afterwards. But lately, as soon as I eat dinner, I feel a wave of nausea and end up rushing to the bathroom, hand over my mouth. It's been happening more and more. Seeing this, whether out of annoyance or concern, David always sighs and says, "Again?" Getting all dramatic about how sick you feel just ticks me off. I get it, pregnancy is tough, right? But doesn't that seem a bit over the top? Women all around the world go through the same struggles and get over it just fine. Why can't you handle it like everyone else? You lack a sense of responsibility as a wife.
I'm sorry. David scolded me almost daily. After throwing up, the fatigue was already unbearable. Yet, when I came back, I'd be showered with harsh words from David. My physical illness was compounding the fragility of my mental state. David's words, flung at me during those moments, often brought tears to my eyes.
Do you think crying will solve everything? What you're doing is failing as a wife. A wife should try to create a comfortable home environment for her husband. I'm scolding you because you're so immature. But crying about it, really?
Looking into my teary eyes, David let out a deep sigh. I understood that it was pitiful to cry over such matters. I knew that as David's wife, I needed to pull myself together. I understood it in my head, but my heart wouldn't follow. On the contrary, in my heart, I blamed David, wondering,
why can't you be more supportive?
Despite the fact that David was working hard at his job. The pressure of being the heir to a famous hotel chain must have been daunting and strenuous. And yet, I was constantly disappointing him. His words, "You're failing as a wife," stung me deeply. And that sting, like a stake driven into my heart, didn't go away. In fact, every day, more stakes were driven in, and my heart was screaming that it had reached its limit. Despite everything, I did my best to support David in my own way. The baby in my belly was growing steadily, and the doctors said the progress was good. But giving birth doesn't mean it's over. In fact, thinking about having to raise a child made me realize that this was just the beginning. And that's why I tried to motivate myself to work harder. David didn't accompany me even when buying baby supplies. He always had different reasons. He was busy with work, had social commitments, wanted to relax at home, and so on. Seeing this, my mother-in-law offered to help. She drove me around in her free time to buy things for the baby.
Karen, I'm so sorry about this. David can be so thoughtless.
My mother-in-law apologized every time we met. But I knew David was on the path to becoming the manager of a well-known resort hotel. I knew it would be difficult for him to find time since before we got married. Yet, his repeated actions that showed a lack of awareness as a father were certainly disheartening. Despite all the pain, I kept on going. Finally, my labor pains began and I was admitted to the hospital. However, even during my hospital stay, David didn't visit me at all.
I'm sorry you're feeling lonely. I told him to take a break from work and spend some time with you, but it seems he can only think about work.
My father-in-law said apologetically. I understand that the heir to such a position must face various concerns. Indeed, as the heir, there could be concerns to be had. But to not even come see his hospitalized wife's face, what's that about? David only came for the birth. He wouldn't even hold my hand as I writhed in pain. Just stood by, merely watching. How lonely that made me feel. Even so, our baby was born healthily. The first cry echoing in the delivery room. Hearing it, I almost felt like crying myself. After the birth, things calmed down, and I was alone with David in the hospital. Since it was the first time in a while we were face to face, I was thinking about what to talk about when David said, "I have something to tell you." As I cocked my head, wondering what it could be, David began to speak. And then he said something outrageous.
Now that the heir is born, you're of no use to me. Leave the kid and get out. We don't have the luxury to provide for a freeloader.
I felt dizzy at David's words. Of no use? Leave the kid and get out? Freeloader? What is David saying? I've been trying so hard for David's sake. I felt like something I had been holding onto for years was slowly slipping away. It was my love for David. Seeing him smiling smugly after betraying me so cruelly, anger began to well up within me. I won't feel satisfied until I thoroughly bring David down. I will do everything I can to make sure of it. With that resolve, I decided to take action. If that's the case, fine. On the day of discharge, I'll leave the kid and go, okay? I asked with a smile. David widened his eyes, perhaps not expecting me to agree so readily. Of course, I wasn't just saying those words for the sake of it. I truly believed it would be okay to do so. That's a relief you're quick to decide. Don't worry, I'll explain everything to our folks. After we get home, let's go through the attorney for the divorce proceedings. David, who initially seemed surprised, realized I was serious, breathed a sigh of relief, and said that with a smile. Of course, I didn't say that without a plan. Rather, I was convinced that by doing this, I could surely give David a nightmare. David didn't come to see me at all until the day of my discharge. He didn't even participate in the workshops planned by the hospital. While I had expected as much, I couldn't help but smile at his thoughtlessness. David really doesn't think things through. After a while, the day of my discharge finally arrived. I came back home carrying the baby. Then there it was, paperwork from the lawyer that David must have prepared in advance.
Can you fill them out quickly? Don't tell me you've changed your mind. I'm all set to get a divorce.
I won't say anything like that. I put the baby to sleep, feeling irked by David's words, and quickly filled out the paperwork. David had already filled in the parts he needed to, so the papers were soon completed.
Well then, goodbye.
Thank you for everything, I said. Then, I returned to my room, took only the bare minimum of my belongings, and left the house. Then, I decided to stay at my parents' house for a while. Seeing me arrive with nothing but the clothes on my back, my parents were worried. But as I explained that I had my own reasons for everything, they said nothing and served me a warm meal. After spending a pleasant time with my parents, the night grew late, and I decided to go to bed. Being quite tired, I was able to fall into a deep sleep immediately. But a few hours later, I was jolted awake by the shrill sound of my smartphone. Rubbing the sleep out of my eyes and checking my phone, it showed more than 30 missed calls from David. There were also numerous messages pleading me to answer the phone, making it apparent that he was in a dire situation. David seemed more cornered than I thought. I almost laughed in satisfaction, but held it in. Wondering what the situation was, I decided to call him back.
Hello, is that you, Karen? It's Karen, right? Please, help me with the baby.
David began explaining the current state of affairs. After I left, David had tried to take care of the baby himself, gathering whatever information he could. But parenting isn't something you can just wing with knowledge alone. Plus, our baby was just born. It was undoubtedly demanding. David, who had never shown any interest in housework or the baby except as a means to secure his heir, was clearly unfit to be a parent. As I expected, David started to lose his nerve almost immediately. Exhausted, he went to sleep only to be woken up by the baby's crying. Although he was aware of the concept of crying at night, the reality exceeded David's expectations. Even when he finally got the baby to sleep, the crying would soon start again, disturbing his sleep. David seemed at his wit's end, unable to get a break from the relentless responsibility.
Please, come back home now. I didn't know it was this tough. I realized I can't do it without you. I'll forget about the divorce.
Come back home now? Forget about the divorce? That's ridiculous. It's not to my benefit at all. It's actually a loss for me. But David kept repeating desperately.
Come back. I can't do it without you.
If I still had feelings for the old David, I would have probably responded to these pleas. But I didn't give a damn about David now. I had no intention of reaching out to him. Sorry, but you need to give up. We just can't be together, no matter what. We're divorced, we're no longer a couple. I'm already being nice by answering your calls. Really, I couldn't care less. I was sure that no matter what he proposed, I would never consider going back to David. But David kept desperately trying to hold on to me. Despite the fact that he hadn't done anything for me when I was having a tough pregnancy. Even more, he had left all the childcare and its necessities to me. He didn't even come to see me when I was in the hospital. But when it came to the baby, He wanted to claim it as his own and kick me out. A sigh escaped my lips at David's audacity. Why did I ever marry such a man? Where did I go wrong? As if he couldn't comprehend my feelings at all, David was trying to keep me on the line with his desperate voice. It was so annoying.
I was wrong, I realize that now. I deeply regret it. I underestimated parenting, I had no idea it was this hard. I need you, Karen.
No matter how many times I say, I will never go back. Or,
we are divorced.
David refuses to hear me, instead repeating,
I can't do it without you, Karen.
Like a stubborn child. It was clear that he didn't intend to listen to a word I said. After all, David was still very much a child himself. David is like a child, never satisfied unless things go exactly his way. It's far from amusing considering his age.
Regardless of what happens, I have no intention of getting back together, just so you know. Oh, but I would like to take the baby if possible. I'll be visiting your place soon to discuss this, okay?
Even though he's David's child, a good-for-nothing man, I still love my baby. If David ends up having custody, I'm certain the child will suffer in the future. I returned to my parents' house to create a suitable environment to raise the child.
You're coming over?
Even though I clearly said, I want to take the baby, he seemed to only pick up on the part about me visiting, brightening his tone, which annoyed me. But I had no intention of going to get my child without a plan. For the sake of my child, I was going to retrieve him today at noon, and to prepare, I messaged certain individuals. I honestly wasn't expecting things to go smoothly, but when I explained the entire situation, these people got so angry, even through text, and said they'd go over to David's house right away. With that, all the necessary players were in place. Now, all I had to do was go to David's house. Realizing dawn had broken, I got ready and headed to David's. When I arrived, I noticed shoes that weren't David's by the entrance. Impressed by their promptness, I entered the house. There was David, sitting upright, surrounded by my in-laws. Upon noticing me, my mother-in-law acknowledged my presence and gestured for me to sit on the sofa. David stared at me as if pleading for help. Yes, the people I had called were my in-laws. I told my in-laws everything that had happened. My in-laws were absolutely furious at David's actions. As soon as they hung up the phone, they rushed over to David's, saying,
We won't rest until we've given him a good talking to.
Apparently, when they arrived at the house, David was sleeping with earplugs in, the baby was crying loudly, and the house was in a mess. All this chaos after just one day without me. Despite wanting an heir and leaving the baby behind, once he had to actually take care of the child, he got tired and couldn't be bothered. Such behavior is unacceptable. According to my in-laws, they cleaned up the house and took care of the baby as soon as they arrived, but until then, the state of the house was dreadful.
It's really unbelievable. He can't live properly on his own, yet he treated Karen, who supported him all this time, so poorly and ended up kicking her out of the house.
My father-in-law sighed at David's inexcusably outrageous behavior. What David did is beyond forgiveness. If he was going to kick me out, he should at least be capable of handling the basic necessities of life on his own. But until the very end, he was dependent on me, and he kicked me out without a word of thanks.
I'm truly sorry for what my son has done. I can't apologize enough to you, Karen. I will make sure David reflects on his actions, so please, find it in your heart to forgive him.
With that, my mother-in-law glared at David. David reacted with a display of annoyance, exclaiming,
Come on, Mom!
Seeing David quietly submit in front of his parents, I couldn't help but chuckle. He was meek as a lamb. A stark contrast to the bullying attitude he had when it was just the two of us, and his repeated disrespectful remarks.
Enough! Apologize to Karen now.
My father-in-law yelled, causing David to flinch. My father-in-law glared at David with a piercing gaze. Startled by this, David blurted out,
I am truly sorry. I'll change, I promise. Please, forgive me.
In apology. His demeanor was so comical that I nearly burst into laughter right there. Perhaps unable to bear the feeling of his pride being crushed, David's arms were shaking uncontrollably. When I inadvertently let out a chuckle, David looked up and glared at me, as if trying to intimidate me. Seeing this, my father-in-law asked in a stern tone,
David?
No matter how much David resisted, he couldn't go against his in-laws. After all, they could decide if he would be the next CEO or not at their whim. Being scolded by his father-in-law, David fell silent and just looked down. I didn't want to waste any more time on David. After discussing future plans with my in-laws, I left the house I had lived in for a long time, taking my son with me. To be honest, I'd had a tough time for a long while. I was emotionally drained when I gave birth to my son. I can't afford to spend any more time for David. I have to lead my own life. I looked down at the face of the sleeping baby in my arms. A face that resembles both me and David. Yet, now I find my son truly adorable. Had I continued to live without peace of mind, I wouldn't have been able to see my child as cute. In retrospect, I'm glad I could settle various matters. Of course, David will likely suffer in the future. But that's no longer my concern. Subsequently, on the advice of my in-laws, I decided to demand alimony as a childcare from David. Initially, David was reluctant to pay the alimony, but under pressure from his in-laws, he reluctantly agreed. However, the condition was that his in-laws wouldn't help him out with the alimony payment. Most of the money David has is financial aid from his in-laws. That's why he threw a tantrum, saying he couldn't possibly pay hundreds of thousands in alimony by himself. Furthermore, my in-laws decided to disown David. They ousted him from the position of next CEO and apparently decided to have an employee they trusted take over. Having been cut off from his in-laws, and in debt from paying alimony, David is now struggling to make ends meet, doing odd jobs day and night. He seems to be trying to get in touch with me through mutual friends, but I had taken measures beforehand, so I should be fine. I later found a new house while raising my son at my parents' home. Luckily, it didn't take long to find a good house, so we moved in not long after and are now living just the two of us. I am currently working while sending my son to daycare, earning a living. There's a gap of a few years since I was a full-time homemaker, but I was able to fit into the workplace quickly, and I'm enjoying every day. I had my fair share of struggles and hard times. But now, I'm quite happy. I cherish this happiness and want